extra students, I want to talk a little bit about practicing. I'm going to use Dragonhunter as an example. So before you practice, make sure you're doing what I call the stars. And so first thing, the S for stars stands for sharps and flats. So check the piece to make sure that you are really clear about what sharps or flats or naturals might be in the piece. So that's the first thing. And then T for stars stands for time signature and tempo marking. So make sure you know how fast it's supposed to go. For Dragonhunter, allegro. So allegro means fast, but it's a range. So what I would say for practicing especially, pick a tempo that you can do well. So start out slow, and then as you get better at it, you can increase the tempo. And then accidentals, again, accidental. So you may look at the key and it has two sharps, but maybe there's a note that has a natural instead of a sharp. Or like maybe they want you to play a C natural. So check to make sure that there aren't notes that aren't in the key. That's what the accidentals are, and that's for the A. And then R for rhythms. Check carefully for the rhythms. Make sure you're doing your rhythms correctly. So you might go through and talk yourself through the rhythms before you play it, and I'll show you that in a minute. And then the last, the S for stars, is signs. Make sure you're including the dynamics, articulations, repeats, and endings, and all of those things. So stars, that's what it stands for. And so look at all those things before you play. And I call it training your brain. You want to make sure that you know what you're going to do before you do it, okay? So as an example, between 4 and measure 12 in Dragonhunter, that's what I'm going to play for you. I'm looking at it. I notice that there are two sharps. So we have F sharp and C sharp. Looks to me like it's the key of D. So in my brain, I'm going to be thinking on my instrument where those notes are. I'm looking between 4 and 12, and I don't see any accidentals. So it's just in the regular key. Tempo markings, again, it's fast, but I'm not going to go too fast, but I'm going to choose a tempo that works for me. And then we're looking at the rhythms. This is one thing that I think is super important. So for instance, I'm looking at the violin part in measure 4. You have eighth and 2 quarters and eighth and you have a quarter and 2 eighths and quarter and 2 eighths. So in this pattern, you might say pi, apple, pi, apple. So you might air bow the rhythm. You might go pi, apple, right? Just to make sure you're clear. Once you got it, pi, apple, apple. And then the next measure, I see 4 eighth notes and 2 quarter notes. So maybe you do pepperoni pizza. Pepperoni pizza. And then maybe you add measure 4 and measure 5 together. So on the violin part, it would be pi, apple, pepperoni pizza. So as you go along, I would figure out the rhythm first. Sometimes with quarter notes, we just say pi. And I also see a dotted half note. So you might say 1, 2, 3, because that's a 3-count note, right? So however you want to count it is fine, whatever makes sense for you. And make sure you have the rhythm correct before you try to play. So here's an example. I'm going to start it for you. So I start with 1 measure, then chunk it with 2 measures, then add 3 measures. And I'm going to do the whole thing for you just to get an idea. Hopefully you get all the way through the section you're playing just with the rhythm. So this is air bowing. It's not with any note check. So here is air bowing in rhythms from 4 to 12. It's pi, apple, pepperoni pizza, pie, rest. Pie, apple, pepperoni pizza, pie, apple, 1, 2, 3, apple pie. So I just went all the way from 4 to 12, air bowing in rhythms. Now, of course, cello players, bass players, you're gonna have a different part than what I just did. You can do the same thing with your part. Okay, so I've got the rhythm set in my head. I've gone measure by measure, and I've chunked the measures together, right? And then do the same idea when you're practicing. So pick a measure. So if I were to pick measure 4, just do that measure. And making sure this is pi, apple, or down doggy, up doggy, however rhythm you want to call it. Making sure that you're doing full bows on the quarter notes and half notes on the eighth notes. Full bow from frog to tip. Okay, I feel like I have that measure. Now I'm going to try the second measure. So add the second measure. Got that? If you don't have that, play it over and over again. Now maybe you're messing up in a few notes, right? Maybe you want to practice this measure. So maybe your fingers are getting kind of twisted. So in the second measure there, which is actually my measure 5, maybe you want to do it in different rhythms. Maybe you want to do it in different volumes. Maybe 1 and 3, or 3 and 1. Just turn it into an exercise. Maybe you want to do it forward and backwards. Here's that measure forward, and then I'm going to do it backwards. That's kind of fun. Sounds kind of funky, doesn't it? So you can do forward, backwards, different rhythms, different volumes, turn it into an exercise. So now I've got measure 2 in pretty good shape. So now I'm going to go back to measure 1 and add measure 1 and measure 2 together, right? So here we go. Feels pretty good. If I have a bobble in there, go back and re-practice it. So practice in little chunks. Now, for fun, you could do 2 measures forward and backwards. Sounds kind of funny, but it's really good for your brain to give that little extra twist. It's just a way to practice it. Now, maybe you could do that 2 measures in different volumes, right? Maybe I want to do slurs just on the 8th note, right? So you could do it like this. So maybe I want to do it in different rhythms, right? Be creative, make it fun, and that's how I want you to practice it. So once you've isolated the rhythms, isolated the notes, you do a little bit at a time and chunk it together, then you're ready to play the whole thing. So that's the process I want you to do when you're practicing. So do that in everything you do. Isolate what your issues are. Everybody has different things they need to work on. Maybe it's intonation, maybe it's bowing. So choose the thing that, be productive with your practice, choose the thing that you need most. Happy practicing.